Good. Right. Good morning, ladies and gentlemen and all. I'd like to welcome you to Beef Expo 2024. Before I move on to some introductions, I'd like to thank Northwest Auctions for providing this tremendous venue for the event today. These things don't happen easily, and they've been very supportive in helping us get this up and running. So, house rules are, there's no fire alarm planned. If you hear one, run. So, fire exits are marked accordingly. So, I'm going to introduce our panel, our esteemed panel. Then Mark's going to say a few words, an official opening, and then I will try and set the scene for what I hope is a constructive and challenging discussion today. So, if you've not got your question in your pocket, you've got 5 or 6 minutes to get it ready. So on my extreme left is Sir Mark Spencer, our sitting Farming Minister and MP for Sherwood in Nottingham. My immediate left is local boy, Tim Farron, who's MP for Westmoreland, Furness and Eden, and former leader of the Lib Dems. On my immediate right is Prys Morgan, director at Kepak, and also a farmer in Wales. Yeah. Bachelor of Science in Agriculture, bits and pieces. I should also mention that Mark's a farmer, so we've got 2 farmers on the panel as well. And then on my extreme right is Daniel Zeichner, Shadow Farming Minister and MP for Cambridge. So we will probably have to thank them at the end, but I think it is worth it. It's a very esteemed panel. Just put our hands together and welcome them all to the floor. Mark.
So it's a real pleasure to be here. It's a bit weird for me to be on the left. I don't know, Daniel, how you feel. But can I say, if anybody was in any doubt whether or not we matter as a sector, I think just walking around the site today demonstrates how important we are, not only to the rural economy, but to the economy in general. We're a big part of food production in the UK, and we want to be a big part for the food production systems in the UK for a very long time to come. And I think it's really important as a sector that we make sure that we brand ourselves as part of the solutions that we face as a globe. We want to make sure we continue to feed a growing population, a global population. We want to do that with a smaller environmental footprint and to maintain the beautiful landscapes that we see here in Cumbria today. So I think it really matters. That's why the government's helping and supporting. That's why we're investing in grants for beef housing, for calf housing, for new slurry systems. That's why we're looking to improve the grassland offer in SFI coming very soon. That's why we're investing in our abattoir network, in small abattoirs, to make sure that they're there for the future. So we matter. And we're going to matter in the future. I'm delighted to be here. I think this event is a fantastic event, Neil, that you guys have put on, and I hope farmers from up down the country come and see the new tech and the new opportunities that are there for them. So I'm absolutely delighted to open this year's Beef Expo, and can I say, let's have a good day, please enjoy.
Thank you very much. So now, I will attempt to set the scene a little bit. We're running, no, you're down to 3 minutes to think for your first challenging question. So, food farming and finance. In the last 4 or 5 years, I think our industry has went through some serious challenges. For me, one of the changes started during COVID. A lot of our consumers were working from home. A lot of them still work from home. And it's changed the way people live. And I believe there was a re-energising of the link between consumers and British agriculture at that time. So, you can challenge these guys on that, but I'm not allowed to answer questions today, and you have to listen to my opinion. It's quite fun. So COVID, for me, was a bit of a reset for the industry. One of the things that I think all political parties could have learned from COVID was the need to reconnect food production, food preparation and cooking with education. I think there's been a miss in there, and we've got, the levy boards did an excellent job. I'm going to plug AHDB, thanks for their help. But during COVID, they did a fantastic job in creating or starting to re-energise that link back to the consumer. So that was the first chain. And then we had Ukraine. And Ukraine gets the blame for an awful lot, or Putin quite rightly gets the blame for an awful lot of what happened in Ukraine and the massive increase in input prices. But the gas price and fertiliser prices had risen before Ukraine. And that was a consequence of COVID. Again, this is just my opinion, but the world went from production of 80%, and then the reset post-COVID had to go to 120% to catch up, and energy was in high demand. But we had massive input challenges from the Ukraine conflict. And, you know, our fellow farmers in Ukraine, you know, we still sympathise with what they have to go through on a daily basis. Our climate this winter has been grim. It continues, well, I can't really say it continues to be grim because the sun's shining today. But I think we should always remember that there are people out there, also in our industry, facing bigger challenges than what we are. So we've come through the input challenges of Ukraine, and I'm going to say some positive things about beef price. It's even higher than it was during the start of the Ukraine conflict. And we should cash in on that, right? There's demand for British beef. The farm gate price is good. Now is as good a time to invest as any, but I'm not going to tell these guys how to do their job. So, COVID, then Ukraine, but we're probably still trying to fix the biggest issue of all that, which has been masked a little bit by them both. I've done my homework. I think, I've not asked Prys, but I think I'm sat amongst a big bunch of Remainers here. So, and is Brexit one of the bigger problems? You know, have we been able to heal some of the things that Brexit has created? Perhaps not. We now have border issues that we have to see that we didn't have to see before. And these are all given new challenges post-Brexit that perhaps we didn't see. So, I've set the scene. The next bit, and this is all about you today, I want as much coming from you as nothing from me and something from these guys here. So, we're ready. We've got a Roman. Who's got a Roman mic? Somebody's got a Roman mic? We have a Roman mic. We will soon have a Roman mic. While we're waiting for the Roman mic, somebody put their hand up. Right, so I've got three initially. Well, I'm going to go in order. So it'll be Ben, then John Gelder, then a gentleman at the back.
Thanks, Sam. Morning, gentlemen. Thank you so much for being here. Emissions don't respect borders. Rivers meander across them, cattle and sheep are born in one country and reared in another. In the recent Farmers Weekly survey, only 3 in 10 had confidence in devolved nations policy. Isn't it time that once again we had a GB-wide environmental policy? From all of you, please. So,
thanks, Ben. As a farmer in a devolved country, Prys, I'm going to go to you first.
I think devolution has, if you look over the last 20 years, has delivered quite a bit initially, but I think we had a framework to work from at the time, which was the EU framework. Now there's probably more leeway to do different things, and the worst thing that could happen if we had an internal sort of market based on the policy. And I think whilst we hear that governments are supporting agriculture, really if we look at the data, there's decline in sheep numbers, decline in the beef numbers. So the policies I would suggest are driving down reduced production, be that across the UK. So I think there needs to be a level playing field across UK. Yes, there is benefit in having devolved because they're more local and some of the policies are better, but there should be a framework as well to make sure that they are on the same sort of strategy and the same. And food security. For our business then, if you look at Kepak, we need two things really to run our businesses. We need people to work, and of course we've got challenges now in bringing people into the UK to work because there's a significant barrier in how much we have to pay for the people in terms of salary. But more importantly, we need beef and production, and that's a key thing for our business. And at the moment we're seeing a decline. AHDB figures and the levy board figures at the moment are showing a decline of availability for next year around the 3%. So regardless where you are within the UK, we are seeing a contraction in terms of production.
Daniel?
Yes, thank you, and good morning, everybody. And first of all, can I thank you, Neil, and the National Beef Association for making this happen this morning, and also echo many of your opening points. I was with some local farmers last night, and it's pretty clear just how hard the weather's been and the impact that's had on the lambing season. Look, devolution, I actually think it was easier to make it work within the European Union framework, and we're still trying to work out how to make it work within the UK, and I'm not surprised to see those figures. My party's view on this is actually we would like to see more devolution within England, and that's something that's come up repeatedly in my discussions with people. It's quite hard to come up with a farming system that works for my part of the country in East Anglia and this part of the world in the southwest. So it may be more devolution, but there is a problem which you've got to resolve, and this is right across the food system. I was talking to some of the food companies earlier this week about this, with the deposit return schemes and the packaging schemes. They operate on a UK-wide basis. They cannot operate differently for different bits of the UK. So this requires the politicians, us, I'm afraid, to sort out between ourselves, between the devolved administrations and the UK government, a better way of working. But I think we've got quite a long way to go.
Tim?
Well, first of all, welcome to sunny Westmoreland. It is always like this. Trust me, I'm a politician. And welcome to North West Auctions. I mean, and thank you for having us. It's an absolute pleasure to be with you. Ben, you kind of asked two questions there, which is really about the fact that borders or climate change and greenhouse gas emissions do not respect borders, which is an obvious thing, but obviously in public policy terms it gets ignored so much. And then the second thing is about devolution. We have a very strange and incomplete devolution package. I'm not somebody who's obsessed with symmetry, by the way. I'm not sure if I do think there should be an English Parliament. DEFRA acts kind of like the English, well, it is the English Agriculture, Farming, Rural Affairs, Environmental Department, but it does have UK-wide responsibility, and whilst being full of respect to the devolved administrations in Northern Ireland, Scotland and Wales, it has a leadership position and a role. And so a lot of this is about politicians behaving in a grown-up and collegiate way, working across borders and across parties to make sure we have kind of common approaches to these sorts of things, learning from the mistakes and the successes of the others, so to speak. But I think on the main point that you made about borders being utterly invisible to climate change and greenhouse gases, it is a reminder that many of certain aspects of environmental policies through DEFRA and through the devolved administrations simply export the problem to other countries. And it grieves me when potentially good quality farmland ceases to be farmed so that somebody overseas can carry on doing something dreadful. What was the point in that? So it seems very foolish that happened. It's also worth bearing in mind as we try and speak to the country the importance of livestock farming, beef farming, of producing our own food in this country, that if we don't produce the food here, and if we give way to cheaper imports from overseas, where are those imports coming from? Often they are coming from land that was rainforest. And so we are massively displacing the problem. So we need to look at this as a global issue, and we need to remember that very often, always, defending the interests of British farming, British livestock farming, is actually something that is very, very pro-environmental.
Thank you, Tim. Mark?
Yeah, so I mean, I think, number one, I don't think we can put the genie back in the bottle. Devolution has happened. We need to make the system work. And I think behind the scenes, there is quite a lot of maturity and quite a lot of sort of behind-the-scenes discussion to try and build cooperation. But I think some politicians want to see that divergence. They see a political advantage in divergence and causing trouble in that sense. And I think that's quite damaging to us as a United Kingdom. So we need to try and avoid that. But there are lots of cooperation taking place where we do need to make sure. I mean, a really good example of that is electronic ear tags. We have got to have a system that matches up between Scotland, England and Wales. If we end up with one lot on high frequency and one lot on low frequency, that is just mad, because you won't be able to bring your cattle or sheep across the border. So we've got to make sure those little things that we solve, and we need to do that through cooperation and through dialogue.
Ben, would you like to come back on any point?
Yeah, just a little. That's music to my ears about the frequency of the cattle tags. We've got to have unified across the whole of the UK, otherwise it just won't work. So thank you for that answer. I don't feel that we've really addressed this issue properly here, and fair enough, but defence isn't evolved because it's a big, big issue. The environment shouldn't be, I know you say the genie's out the bottle, stick it back in. You don't bury your head. We've got 5,000 red wellies outside the Senate in Wales because of a policy that is not working. The Scots are being quite slow off the mark. DEFRA in the UK has actually been quite quick off the mark, but then changes in overnight. Yourself brought around a couple of weeks ago. It would be a whole lot better if we were treated as one body, because actually, with the trade that goes on across borders, some farms actually span the border, rivers span the borders, wind doesn't stop. We need to actually think about how we join together better, not just with grown-up discussions, but with policy.
Thank you, Ben. I'll ignore the point about Scots being slow. So, before I go to John, just as EIDs have been mentioned, there is unfortunately only one type of EID being demonstrated today, but there is a demonstration in the big ring for everyone who wants to go and see that. So sorry, John, please.
Thank you, Chairman. Congratulations to Northwest Auctions for cooperating in providing the venue for the event. I'm very pleased about that. And for NBA for putting this event on exactly halfway between Land's End and John O'Groats. What a wonderful place to be this morning. But as I read the editorial of the Farmers Weekly this morning, I agreed with basically everything in it about beef farmers and different sorts of beef farmers, how they're all important. And I'm acutely concerned that the challenges on our industry are of such a magnitude that there is so many Cumbrian and further afield farmers that are not going to have the availability to get here today to this wonderful event because of the pressures of their businesses at home. And I would just like to spare a thought for them, because they are the very bedrock of our industry for the supply chain, the consumer and everything. And the opening remarks right across the board have been wonderful. Very, very easily to summarise in a quick statement and say, I agree with you all. Absolutely wonderful, all the points that you've made. But we need to be much more radical. We need to recognise the real importance of our industry and what we've got. We are the number one that has been ignored for so many years because food has been so cheap. 1% overproduction of food is a massive heap. 0.5% under is anarchy. Anarchy is a bigger cost to the nation than the pandemic or the energy crisis ever was. Why should politicians even bother to think about that? Because it's not a problem today, tomorrow or next week probably. So let's excuse them. But the point is, we've been sheltered for my farming career spans 50 years now. And we've been sheltered over that period through having plenty for everybody at the price the retailers wanted it. And that's been the way of the world, and everybody's taken advantage of opportunity. But in government, we have a section called DEFRA. And DEFRA is vitally important to having a successful... We don't want a second-rate DEFRA. We want a state-of-the-art DEFRA to take radical, major decisions, touching on some of the aspects that have been mentioned this morning, about making sure we protect our industry in the appropriate way, we protect the grassroots production side of it, and we make sure that they are there to help protect the consumer. That is the bigger, radical way. Now, in 2016, we had Brexit. I was another one of you Remainers, okay? Absolutely beat myself up for 3 months and then recognised we are Great Britain, we've got to do something about it. And you've got to drive forward, not look backwards. But basically, in 2016, there wasn't a DEFRA fit for purpose. It had no people in it. It had to be rebuilt. And they've made a pretty good job of rebuilding it, dealing with the ELMS programme, the SFI, which needs a lot of tweaking and changing, which the tweaking and changing has to progress along. But there is obstacles standing in the way of it. big obstacles standing in the way of it. And it's up to DEFRA and the ministers and the government to recognise, can they challenge those obstacles? Can they do something about those obstacles? Are they prepared to? I believe that one of our NGOs, Natural England, is now surplus to requirements. It is no longer required. It is an obstacle standing in the way of so many progressive opportunities. Those are the challenges of the government, to recognise, and whether they've got the ambition, the nous, to recognise the big challenges which are going to make big differences to the nation going forward. So the question to you is quite simple. Do you agree that your responsibilities as government are to face up to big challenges and recognise, in agreeing with me, that Natural England is surplus to requirements and needs radical rethink? If you agree, just simply say yes. If you disagree, you're challenged to give me a very good explanation. Thank you.
That's a very, very good question, John, and obviously very well thought out. So, in order of giving everyone a chance to go first, Tim.
Great, thanks, John. Appreciate that. So, do you know what? I actually think at the moment, so that there's lots about how DEFRA is constructed where I feel there's a lack of a central strategy. I feel there's a lack of a food production strategy for the country, which is amongst the reasons why we only produce 60% of the food that we eat in this country and falling, and that is troubling in a time of insecurity, as you rightly set out. I think Natural England very often, one of the things about being in the European Union I noticed from all governments of all parties was you would find they were a very useful excuse to blame for a failure to get things right. And we can't do that now, and so we displace blame onto government agencies. When in the end, whether it's, I mean, we've been talking about flooding in the Lythe Valley, and you've got Natural England, but you've also got the Environment Agency, the Marine Management Organisation. They're all bits of DEFRA. And the worry about quangos, they get a life of their own, and they end up being separate from government policy. And there's a lack of... Well, yeah, well, there's probably more than that. That's just 3 that we're dealing with. So I actually think, so would I scrap Natural England? I don't think I would. I think one of the problems is there's lots of farmers. So you talk about the farmers not here today. That's a key point. And there are loads of people through the transition and the consultation of the transition from the old farm payment scheme to the one we're moving into now. One of the issues, I suspect, with the design of that programme is that so many farmers, particularly around here, they haven't got time to come to conferences. They haven't got time to go to, the consultation meetings we've had here. We had several of them here, haven't we, over the last few years? And as a result, even though I think DEFRA tries to listen to people, you're not going to listen to somebody who's working 90 hours a week, never spends a moment off farm. He's completely and utterly beleaguered under enormous mental pressure as well as economic as well. And so a lot of those people are not in the schemes they could be because of a lack of one-to-one advice for those people to guide them in. Natural England doing its job properly would be a way of doing that. Getting people from outside the tent, inside the tent. They can carry on producing food.
So help me and help, is that a yes or a no?
It's a no, actually, but it's a reason why. It's not that I think Natural England do everything right. It's that I think that they could be a vehicle to bring more people into schemes. At the moment, 100% of my farmers around here are losing 50% of the basic payment this year, and 1 in 8 are in the SFI. And that other 7 in 8, what are they doing? They are seeing potentially the end of the farm. They may be the 6th or 7th generation that farmed, and they are terrified. They're the one that's going to lose it. And they need support, they need the finance, but I don't think the budget is big enough. But we're not even spending the budget that's there. 2.4 billion is the budget for England, and we're only spending 2.2 billion of it. And part of that is because we've not got the hands, not got the advice, not got the people to hold people's hand to get them into those schemes. Right. And we're going to lose farmers as a result.
Tim, thank you. I think it's only fair you get a chance to come back on that.
Yeah, so I think Brexit is an opportunity, actually. I mean, as I say, as someone who campaigned for Remain, I think we do have to acknowledge that democracy happened and we've left the European Union. So let's make that work now. I think it is a huge opportunity. Under the old regime, there were RPA inspections. I want to move away from inspections to help, support and advice. And I think that's a really important message to keep banging that drum that actually no longer are you going to get people turn up on your farm with a tape measure to catch you out. They come down your drive to try and help, support and give you a bit of guidance to make sure that you're tapping into that £2.4 billion, as much of it as you can, to help go in the right direction. So I think that is a huge opportunity. And I think my direct answer to you, John, is maybe, I think, because I think the jury is still out. So I think National England have to prove that they are, A, on our side as a sector, and help and support us be more productive. That's the first thing, but also do that and with a smaller environmental footprint. And if they can't help us deliver that, then you're right, we have to take that in-house and do it ourselves. But I think let's give them the opportunity, treat them as friends, embrace them and work with the system we've got.
Thanks, Mark. Prys, do you want to look at this from a Welsh perspective?
Well, I think just to raise it a level, really, in terms of regardless of how you look at it, and sustainability in its true sense is economic sustainability. We have net farm incomes declining by 40% or so in England and Wales for the livestock sector. It's not sustainable. So that's really, in terms of government policy, be that of Labour in Wales or Conservative in England, basically that is quite simple, that either there is support to farmers through a subsidy, through the tax system, or we've got to be realistic that the public have to pay more for food. So at the moment, I don't think that there is clear policy, I would say, of what we want. It's a little bit of both at the moment, and it's unclear for farmers. And I think, whilst I take your point, Mark, on people do need advice, I think the money needs to go to the farmers rather than the consultants. And I think that's really important that we have that balance right as well. Because having too much advice is no good. At the end of the day, you need those businesses to be sustainable economically going forward, and they will deliver biodiversity, clean water, the carbon sequestration, all those will come. But if you've got a failing business, they're not going to do that. Neither are they going to produce food for the people as well.
Prys, so was that yes or no? I mean, as a country, we really...
I can't remember which way around it was now.
As a country, we really don't learn about these yes-no votes, do we? Daniel, do you want to...
52-48 when it comes down to it.
Yeah. I mean, the reason why the answer is not yes or no is because it's actually probably not the right question, because basically it's not working at the moment, is it? I think is what I hear from so many people. The question...
That is the real number of the question. Radical. We need to be radical. It is not working. You're absolutely right.
It's not...
What are you going to do to make it work?
OK, look, first thing, I'd agree with what Tim said, that we spent years and years blaming Brussels, and in fact, most of the time we were gold-plating it here. And lo and behold, what have we found 6, 7 years on? I'm not blaming Mark for this, I'm afraid it's a cultural thing in the UK. We seem to add complexity at every level and every point. Now, if there's a change of government, and I'm the minister, I can go in on day one and say, oh, we're going to tear it all up and start again. And it took them, I think they've had 4 iterations of SFI already over 6 or 7 years. So will we spend the first 2 or 3 years doing it all again? No. We've got to try and make this work better. We've got to simplify it. There are some structural problems with Natural England, as Tim's identified. Frankly, if you take people out and there aren't enough people and you lose the experienced people, and a lot of experienced people have gone for a range of reasons, you end up with inexperienced people. I was talking to some local people about this last night, who sometimes perhaps over-energised with the zeal that they learnt at college and haven't got either the experience or the confidence to use their judgment. And this is the thing I want to see if we can try and do, actually devolve control down so that people can make judgments locally that work. And I think that is the way to try and solve that conundrum. There's no simple solution to this, though.
Thanks, Daniel.
Just to come in there, I think you've got an excellent opportunity in Wales to make some changes then.
Well, I'm seeing Hugh Davis on Monday, so there's change going on in Wales.
Neil, can I just address...
Absolutely.
Can I just address the word radical, John? Because I think clearly you are a very entrepreneurial farmer who embraces change and you're able to adapt your business. Not everybody is in that position, and I think we do need to make sure we recognise we've got to go on this journey at a pace that all those farmers can cope with and can and can sort of get their head around. Because I think if we are too radical, we'll drive people out of the sector that we don't want to drive out. And I am very conscious that a lot of people are under a lot of pressure at this moment in time. And I think radical approaches to things sometimes have catastrophic, and I mean catastrophic, consequences for individuals' mental health and well-being.
My worry is that we're being radical in the wrong way at the moment, and that so we are very radically, very quickly moving away from the old farm payment scheme, and you've got people who are losing their income. Absolutely. And as I said, only 1 in 8 people are in SFI. Yeah. What's happening to the other 7 and 8? Many of them are in nothing at all. You just heard 40% drop in livestock incomes through the period of this Parliament. What do people do? So beef prices are high now, lamb prices are high now. So lots of people are thinking, these environmental schemes, they're not for me, I'll just max out the livestock, doing the opposite of what the government wants them to do. So we're radically making mistakes, that's what I'm saying. Radical leadership is about having a food production strategy for the United Kingdom, which we do not really have. You know, we are a country that produces too little of our own food. If you want farmers to work with us, with the country, to get environmental goods and all the social goods that you provide us, you've got to remember, first and foremost, you are food producers. And if we don't work with you as food producers, we lose you for everything else as well.
And I think nobody, Tim, is going to disagree with that. John, are you happy? We've learned something here today. Don't ask a politician a yes or a no question.
Yeah, thank you very much for your deliberations, and it was very, very interesting. And I respect your attitude. I mean, Tim sort of waffled a little bit and didn't say anything really. So Mark and Prys were desperate to say yes, but were wise enough just to sit on their hands a little bit. And Daniel's still under deep consideration. But let's just remember that the 1947 Agriculture Act put a MAF together because of the desperation of the last century and created a regional panel system around the country where those regional panels, made up of all the best thinking farmers everywhere throughout, were the ones that turned the country round. And so what that was farmer engagement. And there's a real lesson there for government to get a grip of that. So thank you very much for your responses and your consideration. I hope you keep considering, and let's wait and see. Thank you.
Thank you, John, and we hope they can continue to respond as well. Gentleman at the back.
Hello, yeah, I'm a livestock farmer, live locally. Concerns me a little bit, we live in an island nation. An island nation should have the advantage that it's got sealed borders. We've lived through foot and mouth, destroyed the farming industry for 3 or 4 years, made a right mess of the tourism industry. We've seen bird flu, we can't stop that. We've seen Smellberg, we can't stop that. We can stop swine flu, we can stop the next one if we want to. Government policies sometimes are quite difficult because you've got to please a lot of people and keep everybody happy. Some are very simple. All you need to do is tighten our borders and you're slackening them. Are you just waiting for the next one to come along to destroy the next livestock industry? Or are you going to do something about it? It's a bit like paying insurance and you're not paying it at the moment. Sooner or later we're going to get bitten.
Right, so thank you for the question. Mark, I think I have to go there.
So I think the next one to come is Blue Tongue. I think if it's not here already, unfortunately, tightening the borders won't stop Blue Tongue. It will blow across the channel with midges blowing on the wind. The one that really keeps me awake at night is African swine fever. I think we do need to make sure we do everything we can to keep ASF out of the UK, and we are certainly tightening those borders. The new border operating model is about to be introduced. That is intelligence-led. So if you are a huge importer of food, you know, if you're Tesco, for example, and you are buying from a credible source, delivering to a credible source, there'll be less inspection on low-risk products, but on high-risk products we'll increase those examinations. We also need to tighten up and are doing on illegal imports of meat, so people coming in a transit van with illegal meat in the back, or even consumers who happen to be, for some reason, bringing across a joint of beef or ham or something of that nature, trying to identify and stop that from happening. So I accept your challenge. I think you're right to draw attention to it. We are trying to do as much as we can. We do need to get that balance right between keeping trade flowing as freely as possible across the channel, but doing that in a way which keeps us safe as a sector.
Thank you, Mark. Daniel.
Yeah, I mean, Mark, you say it keeps you awake at night. I have to say I entirely agree with you. I think particularly ASF blue tongue, I fear for the months ahead. But on the border controls, I mean, many of you will have read the reports about what's been going on down at Dover. I've been down to see the Port Health Authority. And frankly, I mean, there is an argument going on about whether the border control point should be moved 20 miles inland. When you look at some of the stuff that's been seized from some of the white vans, it's just awful, frankly. And I'd rather agree with the questioner. Can we say with confidence it's not going to happen? You've got to keep up all those efforts and the protection. When one looks at the long wait for investment in the Animal Plant and Health Agency down at Weybridge, I mean, my understanding is it's finally getting there. As a country, are we investing enough in it? It's the usual thing, isn't it? When it happens, you say you haven't invested enough. But I mean, as a shadow minister, I don't have the direct access to civil servants. I'm confident that Mark's doing all he can. I'll have to make the same argument with my colleagues as I suspect he does. But I agree. When it happens, then suddenly the country says, why didn't you do anything? But you have to spend the money, don't you?
Prys.
Controlling the borders is really important for stopping disease coming in. But I think you touched upon in terms of investment and sort of looking to the future as well. A classic would be blue tongue and vaccination, because that's probably how we could sort it out. But that's obviously something that requires a lot of money, and it is an insurance. We don't know when or if we're going to use it. So it's quite a challenge really to make sure that we have all the tools in the box. So we probably do need the border controls. We definitely do need the border controls, but also we need investment in research and vaccine development, for example, for blue tongue. And there'll be other diseases, no doubt, that'll come with time, as we've seen. And Schmallenberg has caused havoc in some flocks and herds this year already. So there is always something on the horizon, and we need that research to make sure that we've got the right tools in the box.
Tim.
Adrian, you do an important service to remind us of this. I mean, it's 23 years since foot and mouth, and that doesn't seem like yesterday. The cost to the country was utterly vast. And the cost of making sure that our borders are properly policed, that we invest in all the research people have talked about, Pirbright is equipped, for example, and that we're doing everything we can to make sure that we protect against animal disease outbreaks, it is worth it. Prys, you mentioned, investment. Investment is what it is. There will be a cost, but the savings to the country is utterly vast. And I don't just mean financially. I'm looking around and I see people who are, probably of an age, shall we say, to have very fully remembered foot and mouth and to still seriously bear the scars. It was devastating, utterly devastating to this community, and it was worth it would have been worth almost any amount of investment to have prevented that happening in the first place. So yes, I see blue tongue as a major threat coming forward, other things as well, AFS. I think all of these things are a great concern. So you've got to get the balance right, as Mark says. We want to make sure we have stringent controls at the borders, that we're very clear about making sure that we test things that come in. At the same time, we don't slow down trade, so your exports are screwed up. And it's important to get that balance right. But my worry is that, and I don't blame this government, it's the passage of time. If we're not careful, policymakers of all kinds become a bit complacent, because that's a generation ago and we forget about it. I would urge you all to read Don Curry's report that was written 20 odd years ago about foot and mouth, about what happened and about the conclusions. Let's not forget those lessons learned, because I'd hate for us to make the same mistakes again.
Thank you.
Can I just on blue tongue, there's a really active discussion taking place in the background at this moment in time. And if you have views, make sure the National Beef Association or your local NFU know your views, because I think as a nation, as a sector, we've got to work together to make sure we decide on how we're going to deal with this incident, which is inevitable. Vaccine, I'm told, we've kicked the tyres really hard on vaccine. I'm told there isn't going to be an active vaccine until about November, by which time it's probably too late. And so we've got to then think about what restrictions do we put in place and where do we put those restrictions, because that also has an impact on people's ability to move cattle around the country, and also has a big impact on agricultural shows coming up if we're going to move from blue tone free zones into and out of areas where the disease may be prevalent.
Yeah.
And just on that then, I think that raises the issue of devolution again, making sure that, you know, our plant, for example, in Wales and our plant in England can get access to the stock, which is really important.
Yes.
You know, we're not sort of dealing with taking them down the road 5 miles.
Yeah.
You know, we procure from all over the UK, and that's something that needs to be remembered, really.
Yeah.
Well, and auction markets, of course. So if you're selling in the fat ring, do you need a pre-movement test before you go into the fat ring? And what happens in the difference between the store ring and the fat ring? We've got to get all of that right, and we've scoped out all of those scenarios. So there is an active discussion taking place at this moment in time with the sector to get all of that right. And so I would encourage you to engage in that process.
So would you like to come back?
Yeah, there's obviously some we can do something about. Some that blue tongue comes on the wind, some of that comes on the wind, we can't do anything about that. It's something we can. You go to Australia, you go to America, you get off the plane and sit on the border control tonight and tell me that I was a match there. If they do, that's great. But at this moment in time, we don't.
Yeah, no.
We can prevent some, and we're not doing enough to prevent them. If you put them out, we could have a breakout again in 10 years' time because our border controls are being relaxed.
Yeah.
What would we say? Just say we haven't been.
Yeah, your point's well made, Sam. This gentleman next to the speaker was next.
Oh, you sure?
Sorry, he's been. And while Sam's wandering around, I think the blue tongue scenario is an industry concern. We are going through an environmental change in our weather. As temperatures increase, there is likely to be more midge activity as years go on. So those challenges are going to become thick and fast. Sir.
Thank you very much. In farming, we're looking at what is going to be there for the next generation and the generation beyond. Current policies seem to be dreamt up short term and only for a few years or for the life of a single government. How can we get some sort of stability so we can plan 1 or 2 generations ahead? That's the first point. And the second point is most diseases don't respect land boundaries. Could we have a uniform control measure across all the devolved administrations, so what is in one place can be rolled out across the rest of the landmass? Thank you.
Thanks for the question. There's a theme coming out here today as well. We're quite close to the border. Daniel, I'm going to let you go first on this one.
Yeah, look, I mean, long-term policy making, frankly, is a challenge across government when you look at it over the last few years. We've been through a very, very unstable few years in politics. So trying to get a long-term vision, frankly, I think we'd all be relieved if we had, well, personally, I'd be quite relieved if we had an election quite soon and things would settle down, because I think one of the biggest problems at the moment is it's very hard for anyone to plan when no one really knows what's going to be happening within the next few months. So this time next year, we ought to hopefully have at least a 5-year scenario ahead of us, which I think will help. But your bigger question there about that longer-term question, I think, touches on some of the points that have already been made. What is the role of government in relation to supporting food production and farming? And traditionally, there's been post-47 all the way through, it's been understood that farming is a special case. It's not like other industries because volatility, because of weather and so on, and because it's food, which is an essential, there is a role for government. That's my view. I have to say, after Brexit, it wasn't entirely clear to me what the current government's view was. I'll pay credit to Mark, because I think Mark has changed the current government's position back towards saying food production matters. But there was a period, frankly, the first iteration of the Agriculture Act, when that wasn't the case. So I think we're probably closer together now on saying food matters, but that does beg the question about how you support and make sure that food producers survive. And that's a very real question, as Tim has pointed out here. So I think what you're hearing from me is, I believe there is a role for government in this. You're probably not surprised to hear that from a Labour politician, but I hope we can have some consensus around that.
Thanks, Daniel. Tim, do you want to go next?
Yeah, sure. I think if I had a criticism of democracy, Churchill said democracy is a terrible system, it's just better than all the alternatives. I think what he meant by that is the fact that, as we've just alluded to, Daniel's alluded to, we have elections every few years, and not one for quite a few years, one imminently. And it focuses politicians on you know, at most the next 4 or 5 years so often. And in this modern world, maybe on the next 5 minutes who can, you know, win the battle on social media. And it makes us a very shallow, short-termist society. And so it's all very well trying to be popular in the now. You have to plan for the long term. And how are we going to feed the country in 20, 30, 50 years' time? What's the landscape going to look like in that period of time? What are we going to do about renewable energy? What are we going to do about food security? What are we going to do about transport? All these big things that you might invest in and plan for now that might actually come to fruition in your children's or even grandchildren's time. And to be a statesperson, which, you know, there seems to be a lack of at the moment, is to plan beyond the horizon of the current lifetime of any given parliament. One thing I would say, and Daniel's alluded to this, is to say that I think that the parties in Westminster are pretty united in believing that the principles of ELMS are the right thing in the sense of public money for public good. And we will disagree over the delivery, the nature of the transition. I will take the view that the process is rushed through to the extent that we're not getting money through to farmers, and the money that is going to farmers is going to the hands of too few, often big landowners, and we are losing tenants, and we are pushing smaller farmers into making decisions they'd rather not make. That is not me saying that ELMS is a bad thing and that we should rip it all up and start again. It's me saying we could manage the transition in a better way than we currently are. And so that, I think, is absolutely crucial that we do that. We listen to farmers, we get money into pocket. It's important that we do that. Otherwise, either people will make poor decisions because they've got to keep their head above water, or they will leave the industry altogether. And we are seeing an awful lot of that at the moment, and young people won't enter. And that terrifies me. And that's where I think the long-term side of things comes in. And then you talked about you know, a common UK-wide approach to kind of disease, and we touched upon that earlier on. An observation is that in 2001 with foot and mouth, the mainland administrations, not Northern Ireland, but England, Scotland and Wales, were all governed by the same party. Wales, Scotland and England all had Labour or Labour-led governments. And we mustn't have to rely upon one party running every corner of the country for there to be some kind of unity and togetherness. We need to be able to be grown up enough to work across boundaries, not play the grievance game, and ensure that we think about what is good for the country in the long term.
Thanks, Tim. Right.
So I think if ever there was a moment where we need the brightest and the best young people to come into our sector, it is now to solve those challenges that we've talked about all morning. So we need to think about how we can inspire those brightest and best to come into our sector, and it needs to be profitable, to be blunt. Why would you come and join the farming business if you're not making a profit? And I hesitate because we've got next generation Spencer in the audience, so I be careful what I say. But you know, I think you can't be green if you're in the red. I think number one, and so let's try and build a system, which is what we're trying to do, to keep you profitable and to keep you sustainable in every sense. So sustainable in an environmental sense, but sustainable in an economic sense, so you can carry on producing the great British food you are doing, and drag the next generation in to come and do that job.
Prys, last word.
Yeah, I think 5 years is much too short when you're running a farming business. And with all due respect, it's a 5-year term, but it takes 12 months probably to get the policies agreed. And then you've got 4 years to go. Then you need the schemes. Then you've got another year to agree the scheme. And lo and behold, you're running out of time to deliver. And I'm not saying Labour or...
We're happy to have 10, don't worry.
Yeah, but what I'm saying is it's much too short a time scale, really. And we seriously need to have that strategic view to see, even the life cycle of beef is 3 years, you know, so we really need to have that understanding. I've had discussions recently about support for farmers through the Sustainable Farming Scheme on an annual basis. Well, that's not going to work. Yeah. That needs to be on a much longer term. And I think we haven't really given farmers, you know, the sort of right credibility, really. If you look at the 1947 Act, farmers responded to it. If you look at EU policy, farmers responded to it. You know, farmers are really, really good. And I, as a farmer, would be good at responding, giving the right tools to do the work. And yes, it does come marked down to profitability. and that's not there in the livestock sector at the moment for people to have that future. I've got a son, and he sees his friends on holiday, good wages, and he's at home today because he wasn't coming because somebody needs to look after the sheep. So, that's a good example really of, we really need to see where we have that strategy going forward. System we have at the moment, somehow we have to get past that, I think.
Yeah. Very good. Great. So, sorry, there was Sam's question at the back.
Hi, I'm speaking as a beef farmer. Do you think cattle get the recognition they deserve in terms of climate change, for mopping up all the byproducts from the human food chain? Because really they are essentially sort of equivalent to the pig that used to be at the bottom of the garden, and they eat all the byproducts that are left over from the human food chain that would just rot and produce gas if the cattle didn't eat them. And it's not poultry or pigs, because they don't have the stomachs to be able to eat waste vegetables and things. And I'm not sure this gets the recognition it deserves, really.
Yeah, so great question. I'm not allowed to answer, but I will, and I don't think our industry gets the credit it deserves. So I'm going to start, we'll just go to line Mark.
So I think I get irritated as well, frankly, by being lectured by people saying that beef and sheep are killing the planet and we should eat avocados from Mexico. I don't subscribe to that rubbish. I think, as I said at the beginning, we should be part of the solution. We are part of that solution, and we need to make sure that we brand ourselves as that, and we big up our own credentials in terms of managing the beautiful landscape, producing top quality food, and doing that with a smaller environmental footprint. And I think if we get all of that right, then British consumers will recognise and do recognise the quality of the product we produce, and that surely leads to a brighter future.
Yeah, I don't think you do get the credit you deserve, and I think that there is so much messaging out there that farmers are somehow, fundamental to climate change, being responsible for it. Absolute rubbish. 70% of England's land mass is agricultural land. Only 12% of our emissions are in any way agricultural. Farmers absolutely are part of the solution. And you look at, for example, the role of cattle in this part of the world. I mean, here we are in Westmoreland. You're about 6 miles from the Lake District one way, 6 miles from the Yorkshire Dales in another direction. We have this enormous tourism economy here. Outside of London, it's the biggest visitor destination anywhere in the country. And they don't just come because the hotels are nice. They come because of the lakes, but they come also because of the landscape. In the lakes, we got World Heritage Site status just a few years ago. We're proud to have it. It's an important part of our tourism offer. And if you look at UNESCO's awarding of that status, I promise you they gave as much credit to the farmers as they did to the glaciers for shaping our landscape. And undoubtedly cattle farming is a major part of that. It's resilient, it absolutely is diverse, it does exactly all the things you just said in terms of making use of all the stuff that nobody else would eat, and it's vital to our economy but also to our communities and our society. Very often when I talk to farmers groups, the danger is all you do is talk about farming, but the reality is farmers are the absolute centre point of rural communities. Schools wouldn't happen, shops wouldn't be the case, we wouldn't have the village communities that we have without farmers, and without the livestock that they farm, then we're lost completely. So we need to turn that narrative around that blames farmers for climate change. It's exactly the opposite. You are on the front line and we owe lots to you.
Thanks, Tim. And let's just magnify the comment on rural communities being so valuable. Prys.
I think when we look at cattle and the way we look at agriculture in the UK, and we've got our role to play in mitigating climate change, but really we'd look at it from a global perspective. And I was reading a DEFRA report, I think it was 2021, looking at productivity across the world. Our productivity is really good. There's, we can't fix the global problem of climate change. The whole world has to change, and at the moment we can't be sort of shooting ourselves in the foot and reducing our production whilst others are increasing their production. Cattle in the uplands, they're non-selective graziers, they're much better, give you much more biodiversity and managed properly. And the best people to do that, I would say, are farmers. We've seen examples where conservation organisations are removing livestock from the hills, and you end up with grassland that you can't graze, and it becomes a dominant single species mountain. And that doesn't benefit anybody.
Nope.
And then you've got risk of fire, and then there's another problem. So I think we just need to make sure that we work with the people that know the land, rather than sort of make decisions easily in an office. Oh, that sounds good. Well, it doesn't work on our farm. So we need to make sure that we work with farmers to have the solution, rather than other people that are coming in to say, you must do this, you must do that. And it won't work if you dictate. You've got to lead, and that's the best way to do it, I think.
Daniel, please.
Well, you're going to be disappointed here. I agree absolutely with virtually everything that's been said. And a lot of the time I find myself arguing with people who say, well, let's leave it to nature. And I say, well, look, have you got any idea what that would look like? And generally the answer is, no, they don't. There's just this idea that nature somehow is good and the stuff that we do is bad. And I really, really argue against that, because what you do is you manage the landscape. Now, you can have an argument about how far you might want to go back if you want to change it. We could change it. But we are managing it, and the responsibilities come with that. And I think you should be given the respect that you deserve for the work that you do. So I think there is a positive story to be told, and I think you can see it also when there was that debate a few years ago around trade, which we haven't gone on to much, about hormone-fed beef coming in, flooding into the country. That was a big response, if you got that petition, wasn't it? I mean, it was really big, and that was way beyond the farming community. And so I think on one level, there is some understanding out there from the wider public, but I have to say to you, it's not always very good. And that's where more work needs to be done. And in a way, some people sometimes say to me, you represent an urban community, and I do, and I think it's part of my duty to tell my people what it is that you do. The only bit I'd ask in exchange is that we try and understand each other more, because I think that's actually one of the biggest problems in the country now. It's amazing, isn't it? This era of mass communication sometimes seem people understand each other less rather than more, and we've got to challenge that.
Yeah, it's mass broadcasting rather than communication, I would say.
Indeed, yeah, polarised, going past each other. Yeah.
Thanks, panel. So we're going to have, I'm just thinking on my feet a little bit here. It's almost becoming a bit of a love-in. It's, everybody's agreeing far too much, and this is not what we, yeah, but this is not what we expected. But
can I just bring in one point then on that? The one thing that hasn't come out of the Farmers Weekly survey so far is that the biggest threat the beef farmers think is the government. And I was going to be very unkind to Mark and say, I think it's his government that people think is the threat. I actually think it's government in general that people think is the threat. And that's a challenge to us, because government should be on your side, not the threat. So that's something I need to go away and think about, and I'm sure others will.
To be honest, Daniel, that was a 4-country survey, so Wales would have been included somewhere in that. So, Sam, do you want to come back? So are you happy that...
Just very quickly, I just think thank you for your answers. I just think it's just nice to recognise that cattle turn waste products and byproducts into usable protein, and it shouldn't go unnoticed.
Yeah.
Neil, I would just like to ask the panel. A former colleague and boss of mine once said, don't forget the little man. And at the start of your opening, you said there'd been quite a good connect between the consumer, you thought, during COVID. And Mark also said that one of his statements there was about small abattoirs and helping out. In these rural communities that are coming under pressure, with larger landowners and tenant farmers, we're hearing all sorts of things about tenant farmers on larger estates and that being pushed out. Tim, you'd mentioned about 78 people not throwing down stuff, and Mark, you mentioned about smaller abattoirs that I think are really key to rural communities. Your smaller local farms, they put a lot of money into rural communities. Now, rural communities, I believe, are coming under pressure. I'd like to hear what you guys think about that, what you're going to do as your policies, and especially just expand on your point about smaller abattoirs, Mark, please.
Well, and I'll just start at that end, Mark, please.
Yeah. So I mean, we've set up a fund, actually, because I think they are really, really important in that rural...
Please don't forget little man. I'd like to tell us what's happening.
Yeah. So I mean, I declare my interest in all of this as a small, what I consider a small farmer, small beef and sheep farmer in Nottinghamshire. I think those SMEs and those small farms had a huge impact on our landscapes, but they're also a very important part of our communities. And if we lose that fabric, that's why you know, I think it's important to support that. That's why in SFI we loaded the first 50 hectares with an extra £20, so that for those small farmers up and down in Cumbria and Derbyshire, that extra £2,000 might not be a lot to Dyson Farming, but it is a huge chunk of cash for those small livestock farms to, you know, upgrade the quad bike or keep some bit of equipment on the farm. And that's why we've lowered the grants, the lower floor of the grants, so that smaller farmers can buy smaller bits of kit. So it's not about buying a £25,000 piece of kit to drill wheat. Actually, you can buy your handling system, or you can buy that bit of kit that helps your farm. So we are trying to think and help and support those small farms, and that's what certainly drives me.
Thanks. Prys, I'm going to go, because you might have a view on small abattoirs too.
Yeah, I do. I think there's, if you look at the number of abattoirs in the UK, they've declined considerably, and yes, they have a role to play. But I think the costs are significant to set up the abattoirs. Rules and regulations make it very difficult for the smaller abattoirs. I'm not saying that they shouldn't adhere to the rules and regulations, but we, as a major processor, have a team, a technical team, to jump through the hoops, and I think it's adding cost all the way through, from farm all the way through to processing, and indeed exporting. We lose life because now we've got different controls on the borders. So coming back to small family farms, you know, they're really important. I'm afraid to say it comes back to profit. If there's profit, people remain in those rural communities. I'm seeing in our own valley that people are leaving agriculture in their droves, really, the younger generation, because they can't see a future, and they're moving towards driving equipment on road developments. If there's a local road or something being built, they get a job and then they continue and leave farming. There's a lot more part-time farmers. Bottom line is, it needs the income, and a fair income. They're not asking for too much. It's just enough to be living and to be fair. And I'm afraid back, £2,000 wouldn't cover my tractor repair bill last week. So I think we've got to have, you know, a decent amount of money as well across the board. I think we, back on your point of small farms, yes, they're important, but larger farms, I think we've got to be careful as well. Employ a lot of people, and also there may be several families living off a bigger business. So when you look at a business, it's important to look at how many people live off that business as well. So we just got to have that balance as well, I think.
Yeah, Prys, there's a guy out there selling tractors if your tractor's badly broken down.
Look, you're right, the little guy's really up against it, seems to me, and there's almost an inexorable economic force which we're seeing, and I very much echo your points. Last night I was hearing that almost everybody relies on another income.
Yeah.
And is that sustainable? And that's a question, you know, we've got to answer as a society. Do we want to support people to live the way in which people have lived in the past? And again, I mean, it won't come as a surprise to you hearing this from a Labour politician. We saw the social and economic consequences of manufacturing being almost destroyed 30, 40 years ago. We don't want to see the same thing happening to rural communities. So it goes back to that basic question about whether we're going to be prepared as a society to put the money in to keep these kind of systems alive. I think it's worth doing, and I'll try and do that. But it does feel like we're swimming against the tide slightly. But it's part of, again, Tim made the point, obviously, you know, it's your area. It's much wider than just farming. This is sustaining an entire economic system in these parts of the world, which is why I think it's worth supporting. But I don't underestimate how hard it is.
Yeah, and
I think...
yeah. While you're getting the mic switched on, as we move across to Tim, and I think our industry here is built on a family farm. You know, the UK farming foundation is the family farm. So if we just let Tim comment, and then I'll let you come back.
Yeah, well, just follow up on all that, because I think that is crucial. And I do see rural communities on their last legs. A lot of it is down to the fact that you've got excessive second home ownership, which gobbles up communities, so you haven't got any permanent community. You see the private rented sector collapsing into Airbnb. And so we don't have even the, relatively speaking, affordable private accommodation there for people. That is heartbreaking when you see whole communities, you know, almost evacuated of the people who made them up. It's awful for those people. It's also shocking when it comes to our workforce. And one of the issues we're talking about here, particularly when it comes to abattoirs, small abattoirs, are the workforce pressures that we face. And yes, the standards need to be high, but we need to help small abattoirs. Otherwise, if we lose them, and we are losing them, and the visa rules are a major problem here in terms of staffing them properly and staffing them safely, there's no doubt that small abattoirs closer to the source of production, better for animal welfare, better quality, better for the local community. And we're losing all that by accident, I suspect, rather than by design. And so many, you will hear politicians say, you know, British farming is the best in the world, and it is, and they won't understand why it's the best in the world. And it's the best in the world because of something we just alluded to, and that is because it is based upon the traditional model of the family farm. Even larger farms still sticking, broadly speaking, to the ethos of the small family farm. And my great concern is, as we migrate from current systems to new ones, I've got my utter privilege to represent about 1,200 farms in my constituency. I would say about half of them are tenants, and many of them under enormous pressure at the moment as we see large holdings or large landlords seeking to make decisions not in the interest of their tenant, and you lose those tenants and you lose farming. And all of that goes towards undoing that glue that builds rural communities, and that is small family farms. We will blooming miss it when it's gone, and so we need to fight for it now.
Points well made.
I thank you all for your answers. Yeah, that was my point. It was not Prys. Prys is quite right as well. Your level of the industry needs the support as well from the government to help you guys do what you need to do. I was only picking up on the small abattoirs that were mentioned before, but that sector needs it equally as much as the sector I just highlighted before. But I do think it's the £50 note in your local societies, your local communities. Yeah, big farms, there's lots of employment there as well, but a £50 note that comes out of a small farmer's pocket as well and stays in the community, works around all the other businesses and everything else in that community and helps build it. And I think that's something that mustn't be forgotten about as well in all this. Your rules do need to be done.
Yeah, Prys, go on.
Can I just come in as well? I think supporting local abattoirs, fine, that gives us more capacity. But what really sort of confuses me is that the abattoirs that we have at the moment have got empty hooks because we're not producing enough, and we're going to lose critical mass if we're not careful. Because at the moment what we're seeing is decline, and we see that from the statistics. So having more abattoirs ain't going to fix the issue. And to be honest with you, Tim, I think there is a misconception as well that we look at animals as people, and you know, it's not necessarily true that if you take an animal 5 miles in a rickety old trailer, that it's more welfare friendly than putting it on an Arctic for 5 hours. So I think we've got to have that balance as well and look at things in a very sort of, and use the data to evidence what our decisions are.
Thanks, Prys. Now, there's a lot of hands. I'm going to be fair to everybody in fairness of time, because there's another seminar starts at 10:30. So the next question will be the last question. So I'm going to take the pressure off myself and let Sam pick whoever she gives the microphone to.
Typical Scotsman.
Oh, man.
Thanks. My question is to the panel. The prices we're facing or seeing today are totally unprecedented, and all the farming press are writing about high prices of sheep, high prices of cattle. It's all fantastic to hear, but is it enough? That's the real thing for sustainability. 30 years ago, I had the pleasure of hearing Richard Sadler, one of the founders of the Waitrose Aberdeen Angus scheme in Boston, actually say to a farmer, and the farmer looked at him and said, "Richard, that's fantastic, the 50p a kilo premium you were offering then, but it ain't enough." He looked back and said, "How much do you want?" Now that farmer at that time, 30 years ago, we weren't costing things, we were just producing beef and sheep and making a lifestyle. We've now turned it into a business, and it has to be net profit we're looking at, not high prices. So, you know, every day you see new parts of government coming out. It's like a day at the Graces, going to the Grand National. Different horse, different jockey, same policy. Nothing's changing to be positive, to leave a net profit. So Harvey Jones looks up and says, turnover's vanity, profit is sanity. you know, in the old society, cash was always a reality as well, but that's gone. We don't have a cash society. So do the panel actually think there is a net profit and future in today the beef and probably sheep system production we're running in the UK? Because to me it's failing. And is it all about farmers now buying a small tractor, not a big one, and a bloody big mower and going out making money? Because to me, buying cattle and sheep with no net profit left over actually is an absolute waste of time. Are we just here to be gardeners or beef and sheep farmers is the question I've got for the panel.
So, great question. And while these guys are continuing to think of the answer, come back at 12 o'clock. There's a retailer panel, and I'd love you to ask them the same question, right? So, I think I'd give them time to think about it. While these guys are thinking, you know, the beef price is good, but I'd like it to be the same as sheep at the moment. It would be a bit better. So, Mark, is it enough?
So there is absolutely profit, but the question is, where does that profit sit? Because at the moment, I think there's an unfairness in the supply chain in that there appears to be guaranteed profit in the processing sector and the retail sector, and the farmer ends up picking up the hard chunk of that, of the risk. So the farmer's got the risk and not the reward. I think that is unfair. That's why we have legislated in the dairy sector to make sure we get dairy contracts that are fairer, and we will do the same in the poultry, in eggs and in fresh produce, but we are about to consult on beef and sheep as well at some point in the future, because I think we need to see that fairness in the supply chain. If we don't see that, then those processors and retailers that are making a profit today will not make a profit in the future, because you guys won't be there to produce the product for them. So it's in their interest as well. When I meet them behind the scenes, we have fairly robust conversations. They're very much up for that challenge. They want to make sure that everybody's making a fair and transparent profit. And so we need to work together, don't we, across the whole supply chain.
I'm a retired meat processor.
Yeah.
So for me, if I bought it for £1, I'd put a margin on and I'd sell it within 21, 48 days, whatever it be.
Yeah.
For a farmer, as in all the people here today, they have got 5 years ahead of them in a production system.
Yeah.
I mean, we're not going to go back to an intervention scheme, but there's got to be some sort of guarantee or some support mechanism there that has longevity.
Yeah.
And it's not about which colour you're voting for in terms of party. It's about sustainability.
Yeah.
And that's what it's about. We're not fighting each other. We've actually got to be collaborating together. I was always told years ago that if you ever wanted to get 3 farmers together, you had to shoot 2 of them. All right? Now, we don't work well together in positive times. And it's sad that we can't all be here today.
You're absolutely right. We have a fragmented industry, I think, and that's a long-term problem. But in time, we've got to...
Well, very quickly, I think to some extent you've answered your own question there. The obsession with prices has also got to be associated with the obsession about cost, and the huge volatility of cost is a problem. Now, what role can government play in that? We're not going to be in a situation where government controls things in a way that maybe it did in the last century, but we've got an influence. So energy costs, for instance, we think are really important, which is why Labour's got some views on that, of decoupling ourselves from a volatile international market. A lot of this is about prioritising food security. If you start on the premise that food security matters, and my view is we should be trying to produce more food here rather than less, a whole series of things follow from that, including the points that you're talking about when it needs to be over a long-term time frame. As this last opportunity, final point to make, I think the longer-term view is we're not going to have any industry if we don't have young people in it. And I was hearing from people last night about, I'm afraid, Mark, the failure so far of the new entrance schemes. We need to put much more into that. There is enthusiasm out there, but it's almost impossible for people because of the tenancy issues, because of the need for capital and so on, and the need to mitigate against risk. So sorry, we could talk for a long time, but I'm sympathetic to what you're saying.
Yeah, Prys.
Somebody once told me that if you want to win elections, you need cheap food and a good health service. I'm very sorry to say that cheap food era is finished. So either you have to, because the support mechanism is not there really now to give you the cheap food. So I think people, it's down to governments, be those either colour or whatever, to understand what the strategy is going forward. Is it a cheap food policy? And if it is, there needs to be subsidy, or it's going to be expensive food. And with that, though, comes a lot of volatility in terms of, we haven't discussed today, free trade agreements, imports, and the risk that that brings. We've seen the Ukraine, the Suez, and the fragility of our supply chains. So there's a lot in there. And I think when it comes to, we have a cake, and we need to divide it so that we have genuine sustainability. And I think if you look at, agriculture, that's under pressure. Dare I say it, processors are under pressure as well, because you look at the consolidation over the last 10 years of 15 years. So there is significant pressure, and we have a broken supply chain, and it's up to our friends, the politicians, to work that one out, I think.
Tim, brief, if you can.
I'll do my very, very best. We've not really talked about the impact of the weather the last few weeks and months. And yes, prices are high, costs are high and about to get a lot higher. Where's the straw coming from? How much is it going to cost in the months ahead? So I think we're at a very difficult and dangerous time. I think this is a moment for us to be bringing some derogations, some of the environmental requirements out there, so we can make sure that we can, overwinter, we can do things that are going to be able to shift the dial and make life easier for farmers, as has been suggested. Yes, prices are high, but, farmers take 100% of the risk and get about 5% of the benefit. And so we need to strengthen the grocery code adjudicator so they can act on behalf of all farmers, not just a handful of them, and have much more power. The danger I fear, obviously it's good to have high prices, but the worry is, at the moment you're trying to get people to sign up to new schemes and prices are high, if those schemes feel unattractive or unavailable, and you're seeing your basic payment go away, and you're not in anything else to replace that, then you're going to max out your livestock, and that will undo a lot of the environmental targets the government's trying to have, and it means people will be outside the tent. And the thing is simply this, the greenest thing any government can do is to keep farmers farming, because otherwise all those great environmental policies are just useless bits of paper in a drawer if there aren't hands to put them into practice.
Thank you very much. Right, ladies and gentlemen, before we thank the panel properly, I'm going to try and summarise what we've heard today. So it's not going to be easy. More devolution in England is a point that I've written down. Politicians behaving in a grown-up way was another note. So local farmers not here for different pressures is something quite poignant, I think, and something we should all consider. Natural England, basically, some radical action needed on there. Border controls, perhaps lack of them, be a little bit more sensitive to our own livestock health and welfare. Cattle not getting the credit they deserve for what they consume and what they produce protein from. Don't forget the little man, and remember the abattoir network. I could add a lot more. I'm going to do a little plug on the NBA. We're a relatively small organisation. We've set this up today. Membership is available on our stand. This was a free-to-enter event. You try getting out for free, all right? So we've done our best. I think we've had a cracking show. I think if you guys are available for a few minutes afterwards, if we could go upstairs, there's a couple more questions from the press that we'll probably try and take. On behalf of the NBA, I'd ask you to put your hands together and thank these guys in the correct way.